Every product in our industry, every time it's manufactured, every time it's shipped, has a negative impact on the planet. We are pioneering products that have a positive impact on the planet. All of our chairs are climate positive, but we wanted Path to go to a whole new level.
Every time Path is manufactured, Humanscale has made a commitment to leave the world better off in a measurable way. Path is climate positive, energy positive, water positive, and toxin free. It's challenging to design the most sustainable chair in the world. Putting that design into practice is the hard work of actually becoming more sustainable.
Path is representative of where design and manufacturing must go today. To make a truly positive impact, it's extremely difficult. A lot of things have to line up.
You have to do what's not convenient. You have to work with not just your suppliers, but their suppliers and sometimes their suppliers to get them to do the right thing. The great thing about that is now they can supply all of their customers. By doing this process, you actually make this technology available to the whole industry. And that's one of the ways that we get the industry to do what's right. Our customers have no idea what damage is being done by buying a product that they have no data on. We think it's critical that they demand transparency.
To confirm that Path really is as sustainable as Humanscale claims it is, we have it third-party audited to an external standard. We're showing it can be done.
I think it's our obligation to protect the creatures that live here. I think they have as much right to planet Earth as we do. We've led our industry in sustainability and protecting the environment with the idea of getting others to follow.
When a business makes a decision to purchase sustainably, their impacts are that much greater because they're operating at scale. It lets the industry know that this is what is expected, it sends a signal that this is important, and it gives incentive for manufacturers to change.
When you buy a bunch of Path chairs, it's really at that point not Humanscale who's having the impact, but you, the customer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Design TV by Sandow. I'm Avi Rajagopal, Editor-in-Chief of Metropolis, and we're marking Earth Day today with Humanscale. We're going to talk about a really wonderful concept in sustainable design today, hand printing. Now, all of us have heard of footprints. We're used to talking about the carbon footprint of a building or a project or a process, but handprints are something quite different. And we're going to talk today about how we can use both handprints and footprints to build towards a net positive impact with design in the world, meaning that we don't aim just to do less harm, but that we start to raise our standards a little higher and look towards doing good in the world. Here with me to talk about how we can do that through design are Jane Abernathy, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Humanscale. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Also with us today is Verda Alexander, who is the co-founder of Studio O+A. Verda, such a pleasure to have you.
Hi, Avi. Hi, Jane.
And we also have Michael Pavelski, who is a Senior Associate and the Sustainability Director at the Sherwood Partnership. Michael, such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So let's dig into this idea of handprints a little bit. And maybe, Jane, you want to kick us off here. As I said, the language around footprints has become quite mainstream now. Everybody generally understands what we mean by our footprint. But what is a handprint and how do we use it as an approach in sustainable design, sustainable manufacturing, and sustainable architecture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think handprints are very exciting. And the idea of handprints really comes from Greg Norris, who's a professor of life cycle assessment at Harvard. And having worked, in calculating footprints for many years, he realized that that's not the full picture, that we're not only the sum of the amount of damage we do, we actually can have a positive impact on the world. And we should be able to quantify that in the same way that we quantify our footprints. So I think of handprints like the mirror to footprints. It's calculated in the same ways as footprints are calculated, but what it's measuring is the positive change in the world that you have impacted, you as an individual, or maybe you as a company, in the same way that footprints can be attributed to an individual person or a product or a company, handprints would be the same way, same rules, but sort of mirror intention of measure of positive impact instead.
Is this idea of working towards a positive impact something new in sustainable architecture and sustainable design? Michael, for example, I know when we're talking about architecture, we're often looking at, how do we bring down that EUI? How do we lower our energy, costs or energy burden? And Verda, I know when we're talking about interiors, we're often talking, we say low VOC, right? We're always trying to bring things down, cut the bad stuff out, right? But can you both react to this idea of, changing that mindset towards what can we do good in the world?
We have seen, Avi, an increase, I think, in project teams' interest in looking at, I'll call it sort of what can be accomplished through a net positive approach. So as people well know, buildings account for a significant amount of energy use across the world and in the US particularly. And we also have a significant amount of existing building stock that doesn't often get paid enough attention. It's usually focused on the new buildings that are going up or the major renovations. So we are looking at projects quite a bit more closely, in addition to carbon footprints, but we're looking at what can these projects give back to from an environmental standpoint, from a health and wellness standpoint. So what we typically like to do is sort of a site inventory resources analysis at the beginning and think about what can this site offer the project. So in terms of wind, water, solar, what are the potential abilities that the site has to yield the project to, with the goal of getting to net positive is that's a high goal, but anything that we can do to give back and sort of take back the burden from an energy and material standpoint that we're placing on the planet and resources by doing a project is we're trying to do that more and more today from a big picture design standpoint.
And I had the opportunity to talk to Greg Norris a few months back for my podcast, and he's just such an amazing person. And he conceived of this idea because he was trying to lower his carbon footprint. He wanted to lower it to nothing and realized that that's not possible. We're all individuals, our companies, our projects are always going to have some carbon footprint. And so to counteract that, that's why he came up with this idea of handprinting. It's like, okay, well, if we can't get to zero, is there some way we can give back in a positive way? And his example is this he says, well, what I would do is take an air pump that can pump up car tires to like a Safeway parking lot and stand out there and offer to pump up people's tires, because if you have properly inflated tires, you save 1% of gas throughout a year or whatever. So if I pump up 100 people's tires, then I am net zero for the year. And at 101, I am now net positive. And so that's the general idea of handprinting in a nutshell. He explained it so well. And I think that, yes, I totally agree with, how can we give back in a project in terms of energy systems, but I would love to find a project where I can give back in terms of community as well, creating some sort of community-based something within a project. I'm thinking about all these offices where there's so much unused space. Is there some way that we can give back to a community? And I think we need to think about handprints as not just what we can do within the scope of, say, a project or a practice, but how can we influence change? Like what's the biggest lever that we can pull? And that to me is the best handprint of all.
That's the thing. Handprinting can be such a powerful idea because it completely changes the way we think about this, race to zero, right? It allows for us to sort of live our lives. Nothing on this planet lives without an impact on its fellow beings on the earth. But at the same time, it allows us to reset that balance and hopefully build towards regeneration. What's become even more interesting is that, that pathway, looking at, making a net positive impact, has become even more urgent now. We've seen the recent IPCC report. Continually focusing on reducing our carbon footprint or our impacts on communities or our pollution of natural resources is not going to get us there because we won't get there fast enough. And Verda, as you said, in some cases, it's impossible for us to get to zero. I mean, we would have to stop to exist. And so, handprinting is not, I guess, people often feel like making a positive impact comes after you've reduced everything to zero. And, that's not always the case, right? Jane, you've had some experience with that with your work at Humanscale. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and I definitely support reducing as much as possible. It does seem like a really important, vital first place to start. There's no point in being inefficient and then trying to compensate for that later. Nobody wants to continue business as usual and then also create handprints. But there is a limit to how much we can reduce. And just as you both pointed out, like even if I'm just sitting here doing nothing but breathing, I still have a very small but existing carbon footprint. And so we can never get to absolute zero just by reducing until we don't exist. So we reduce as much as possible as a starting point. And that's where we really started at Humanscale when we were getting all of our products Living Product Challenge certified. We actually did the life cycle assessment for a couple of our products to do, find out what the impacts were with our existing efficient, business as usual supply chain. And then we spent a couple of years with our sourcing team scouring the globe for really efficient suppliers, working with our existing suppliers to get them to step up, finding sources of, folks who were willing to start sourcing ocean plastic, a number of different ways, smaller ways to package the product and really pushing on every front. And we could reduce the footprints between 50 and 60%, depending on the impact category. So it was significant, but not zero. And so it's great to start there. But then, to continue and go even further and actually get to a point of net positive, that's where we start to create more good in the world. And that can look like a whole lot of different things. And to me, that's one of the exciting things about it is, you're reducing, that's always going to be in your business as usual activities. It's going to be within your supply chain, within the things that you're used to interacting with. By definition, your handprints are probably going to be outside of your business as usual. They're probably going to be more creative. They're probably going to be, they could really be anything. It could be pumping car tires. We sponsored solar for a number of not-for-profits that had a positive social impact as well, like affordable housing or animal shelters, a number of different social positive impacts that could be made at the same time. And I think it takes us a little bit out of our usual way of thinking of things when you think of like, well, what does, a company that manufactures this task chair I'm sitting in have to do with sponsoring solar power for an animal shelter? These are all very different things that all play together because at the end of the day, the carbon is in the atmosphere or it's not, and it doesn't, we look to reduce it everywhere that we can. And I think we can be really creative about that. And we can have really interesting projects that don't just have to be within our usual way of how we look at how we operate in the world. We can be creative and we can have greater impacts that can have positive social impacts as well.
I just want to reinforce one thing real quick, this idea of sustainability. And Avi, you mentioned that it's really important and urgent that we start giving back and handprinting because sustainability is here, right? It's the datum line, but we're down here, right? Over decades of doing the wrong thing and do it to our planet and our people, and so we need to help do whatever we can to basically right those wrongs and get back to sustainable. So that's why it's so important that we really look at this more from going beyond sustainability to this idea of regenerative design and giving back.
Berta, you started to talk about some ideas of things that you would like to do with projects. And Michael, you had some examples too of how we can start to look at a net positive impact. Do you have examples of either opportunities or actual project examples where it's been possible to kind of make a positive impact in a certain area, even if it's limited in scope?
Definitely. I think, and one thing I did want to point out is to both Verda and Jane's point about the impact, there's the environmental piece, but I do think that the social impact is very important to address. And what is exciting to me to see is on our projects around the world, we're starting to see more end users actually focus on the social impact piece of sustainability. And some of the third-party rating systems that project teams are going after are now implementing a component that talks about the social impact piece of how do you measure that in a community? How do you measure your impact in a community? Because everyone, as Jane said, we all have a footprint, a carbon footprint, but we also have, beyond the carbon footprint, we have other impacts as people, as part of an organization, working for an organization in different communities. So 10 years ago, I would say it was more about the environmental measure of the building and the site, I think, and a little bit siloed into that sort of realm of we're just looking at our building on our site or our building on our campus. And now I think that the concept that it's really spread, your impact in the community and what you can do from a positive standpoint to Verda's point, like, yeah, we're down lower than where we need to be. So what can we do to lift that up is definitely something that's becoming more part of the conversation on projects. To your question, Avi, so we are looking at projects, and not necessarily that the whole project overall can get to net positive yet, but we do have certain areas when we look at the the energy and the water use, like even convincing, sort of bringing up to the table, let's look at a building that can be fully electrified or fully electric, so that maybe today in 2020 or 2023, when a project comes online, that project isn't fully, carbon neutral or powered by a renewable source, but in 5 years, it easily could be. So setting in motion, I guess for me, that people can do so much with wind, solar, biomass, sort of renewable technologies to support the building, but setting it up for future success when a project or a building can actually shift their footprint and get to that net positive. So ideally, could the building or could the project in 5-10 years generate more than it actually uses? A few projects that's exciting that we're working on, and I'll admit they're smaller scale, we are looking at potentially generating more energy on site than what the building is potentially going to use. So, and that's on an average basis, but I think that's a pretty exciting thing that we can think about, that a project could give back and put more into the grid and the community. I think also people are starting to talk about how does that impact their local community, and what can they do from a standpoint of even if it's a project site that opens a community garden, and has the land, has some of the resources, but it opens up to the community and allows them to be part of that project in a different way than just talking about energy and water constantly and saving, which is important. But there's other pieces too, I think, that Verda pointed out that are just as critical, that we need to start to pay more attention to than we have.
Avi, as you know, I started my thought process thinking about our designs for our workplace, our beautiful workplace designs, and how we were really, who were we serving? We were really designing for the corporate elite. Very few people actually would have access or get the pleasure, the enjoyment of experiencing these workplaces. And so I started to on a journey of thinking about how can my design serve the greater good, not really even thinking that I was hand printing or anything like that. And I took a food truck out into the world and took it on a road trip and brought our design to communities. And that was kind of my first foray into trying something completely different out. And I think what I would love to task all designers with, and I think it's hard because we're taught in school that the client is the ultimate, right? But can we go beyond the client's programs? Even if the client doesn't ask for something, can we see what more we can do either from a social or environmental angle? One of my favorite projects recently that I was reading about is Amazon in Seattle. Their downtown offices, they had a glut of space, extra space. And so rather than just letting it sit idle, they turned it into a 300-bed homeless shelter, dealing with a critical problem that we have here on the West Coast. And so, and I think the CEO there said, oh, it's great because now we have volunteer opportunities for our employees, like right here, right within the building. So it's kind of it's an absolute win-win. So it's those types of projects that I get very excited about. I think there's also ways to give back or think about hand printing. Like I'm doing a lot with my association, right? And we just came out with a position statement. And I know, Avi, you've got the pledge. And I think that the pledge for positive impact, and that is we're hand printing left and right here. We're bringing people along this journey around sustainability and climate change. So I think there's so many ways to hand print above and beyond our projects and our project scopes and our clients.
Absolutely. For everyone who's joining us now or joined us in the last few minutes, we are here talking about how hand printing can combine with our existing understanding of footprints to help us move towards a net positive impact in the world through design. We're talking about that, of course, today on Earth Day, which we're marking at Metropolis with Humanscale, thinking about how we can start to shift design processes towards actually doing more good in the world and not just focusing on doing less harm. For more on everything that Humanscale is doing, you can head on over to humanscale.com. And this past week, they announced, they released the Path Chair, which we're going to get Jane to talk about in just a minute, which makes a net positive impact in the world with every chair that they make. And you can find out more about that at humanscale.com/path. Verda, who's on here, I mentioned was the co-founder of Studio Plus 8, but also is the co-host of a fantastic podcast called Break Some Dishes. And you can find that everywhere you find podcasts. It's absolutely fantastic. And Greg Norris, who originated the concept of handprints, was one of Verda's guests recently. So I urge you all to listen to that. And Michael, of course, is at the Sheward Partnership. You can find out more about the firm's work and the consultancy and partnership that they have with so many organizations around the world at tsbarch.com, that tsbarch.com. Well, back to our conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Jane, we've just heard Michael and Verda talk about how we can start to think about making a positive impact at the building scale and at the scale of a design practice even. But Jane, at Humanscale, you've just released the Path Chair, which has a certified net positive impact in the world. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it represents your journey at Humanscale in terms of handprinting?
Yeah, Path is really kind of the next step on our journey for sustainability, and we've been pushing the boundaries of sustainability for a number of years now. So this is one where we really focused on see what we could do with it. It includes almost 10 pounds of ocean plastic. It's certified climate positive as it's launched, as well as it's water positive and energy positive through the Living Product Challenge certification. And this it's really exciting to see a product that gives back right from the first day that it's manufactured. It sort of takes a lot of the things that we've done and amplifies them. We've always worked to remove all rancid ingredients. With Path, we had a toxicologist do that extra level of review to make sure there's just extra. We just kind of took everything to the next level. So it's been exciting to take it and really push sustainability. See how far we could take it in one product and launch it in Earth Week, which is also really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And Path is Living Product Challenge certified, as are 25 other products in the Humanscale portfolio. It's absolutely fantastic. Just taking one of those things that you talked about as an example, you mentioned that the patcher has, 10 pounds of ocean plastic. And I just want to point out, that one move, of course, it has the benefit of reducing the amount of virgin plastic in the chair. So, there's a reduction component to that, right? It is bringing down the amount of plastic. At the same time, the ocean plastic that you're using prevents that amount of plastic from ending up in the oceans. And so, there is a positive impact on ecosystems. But also there's a social impact on the communities who deal with the fishing nets, who are actually supplying that ocean plastic to you, through your partners. And so very often when we're talking about a measure in sustainability, if we can take the right kind of decision, if we can make the right kind of selection, often you end up having multidimensional impacts. And so what might look like, a reduction in carbon emissions can also mean a positive economic impact in a community, or, it can have a handprinting effect. So I just want to talk a little bit about that with all of you today is, it's about the mindset we bring to some of these decisions sometimes, right? If we think of them just as exercises in reduction, then we might take a decision a certain way. But if we look for opportunities for making a positive impact, even as we reduce, and both of you, Michael and Verda, have also talked to this, it can land us in some interesting places. Can we talk about how those, what you've previously called the social impact and the other impacts can sometimes be connected?
I think definitely. I mean, on many of our projects, the engagement with the community can be a catalyst to opening doors to different sustainability or environmental conservation ideas for projects that a developer and owner may not be thinking about, or thinking about how their footprint or how their place in the community, whether it's a city, whether it's a greenfield site in the suburbs, what that looks like from their perspective. So a lot of the work that we do up front, sort of envisioning projects from a sustainability standpoint, is working with the local, presenting the project and soliciting ideas and feedback about how this project can positively impact the community. Because if development and growth is going to happen, but I think finding a way that it can happen that both benefits the project owner, obviously, which is typically doing it for financial reasons, but also how can it help benefit the community? And what I found is in different communities, you get different feedback, and different pieces and components are important to different people and different cultures and different communities. And that's, to me at least, that's what makes sustainability sort of very interesting and eye-opening. And you want to be a really good listener, because these people are conveying their ideas, and they know the community, they know the place where this project is being located probably better than anybody on the design or construction team. So they bring so many resources, but to me, it's building in the time in the project to make those ideas and concepts heard, so that you can integrate them and sort of incorporate the ones that make sense on both sides. So to Verda's point, you get the win-win for both the community and the project owner or user, and create opportunities that are synergistic for both in a positive way. So integrating those concepts and ideas sort of early when you're putting together your vision of integration of sustainability is probably, I would say, one of the key areas we look for in projects now to get those ideas fed into our project pipelines.
Yeah, I could speak to how that works from the material and product specification viewpoint. We spent some time, as Avi knows, during the pandemic, spent our resources working on a playbook, a toolkit, kind of like Metropolis's climate toolkit, but ours was broader. We have a chapter on material, selecting the right materials. And boy, that was a rabbit hole. And boy, that is just really hard to do. Just specifying something that is redless free, for example, is not as easy as it sounds. There's so many labels and some of them don't connect, and you're often comparing apples to oranges unless you pick a great company like Humanscale, where you know every product that they offer is right up there, right? But the idea is, okay, so say you're interested in selecting something that's redless free, or maybe you're more interested in how that company treats its workers and the community. Well, often if a company's gone to the trouble of providing a non-toxic product on the market, they have gone down their all of their sources. They've done their homework, right? And more than likely, their facilities are all, they also care for their employees in their facilities, and vice versa. If they care about their employees in the community, they're most likely not putting toxic materials in their product. So it's kind of like, regardless of which angle you approach things from, if you're working with a company that's doing the right thing, you're often checking off more boxes than you think. Like if also another example is if you want to save the carbon footprint of shipping something from the other coast, right? And you want to source locally. Well, that's you're checking two boxes right there. You're supporting your local community, and you're also not emitting that transport carbon of shipping. So that's the good news, right? You're often checking off more boxes than you think.
Just to add to that, from kind of a manufacturer's point of view, where we're dealing with mass production, and buildings have a complex supply chain, but we have a complex supply chain that we work with in an ongoing way, so that we can have those relationships that we build over time, and that we can influence those communities as well. So that's something where if you're asking manufacturers to provide the declare labels, to provide especially third-party verified, to step up and meet some of these requirements, then the decisions that get made get repeated, hundreds of thousands of times a year in mass production. The types of suppliers that manufacturers are going to start working with are going to be that much better, and it starts to work deeper into the supply chain as well. And I see the conversation in sustainability is starting to go deeper into, not just what are you doing, but what is your supply chain doing as well, with some of the conversations around the social impacts that happen deeper in the supply chain.
Let's dive a little bit into that a little deeper. All three of you now have brought up this idea of, the materials you select, or the things that designers and architects might select to put on their projects. And every project is such a complex web of, supply chains, right? So the chairs you put in a space have their own supply chain. The glass you use in a facade has its own supply chain. And those are often global networks. They touch communities all over the world. There's just so much impact that you can make through selection. Can you talk a little bit more about, how making selections in certain areas can have a positive impact? Like, Verda, you just spoke about, sourcing locally and how you can check off multiple boxes there. But what are some of the things that designers or architects can commonly look out for if they're thinking about making a positive impact? So, not just, sometimes saying red list free sounds like it's just removing toxic chemicals, but often behind that is, there's so much potential to do good as well. So can we talk about what are some of the areas, maybe product categories, maybe criteria for selection, where there's some potential to make a positive impact rather than, just lowering emissions or lowering toxicity or things like that?
I would have to say it's very helpful if when we're receiving requests, if it is aligned with like industry standards. So, if you're wanting to have a positive impact, helping to push those industry standards, creating, the playbooks that exist to help others also ask those questions in a real and meaningful way, so that it's a relatively consistent ask. And that lets us as, businesses make the business case for making changes that would then align with that. Now, you might not be able to watch that ask and measure the actual direct handprints from it. It's more like advocacy that would then later turn into positive impact. But it is very impactful when the clients are asking for a specific change to be made. Or let's say, if all of our clients were asking about climate, every single time they had a conversation with our sales reps, that would really change the conversation internally. Or if every single client asked about red list ingredients, making sure you don't have red list ingredients to every single manufacturer, then it would really bring it to the attention in a way that then, not the next day, but it does start to change the needle as to why making the business case, investing the resources, and allows the whole industry then to step up. So that advocacy, and even your ask, is really advocacy to ask the industry to change. And if you can make it in a consistent way, like aligning with the pledges that exist and the playbooks that are out there, making them public, that's very helpful, so that when we receive these asks, they're consistent and they can more easily point to the business case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with Jane. I mean, when we're looking at projects in terms of specifications and materials and the impact we can have, I mean, typically what we'll do is create a materials matrix of how do all of the building materials, both from the shell of the building to site materials to what goes into it, how does that have an impact environmentally, whether it's from a health and wellness standpoint for the occupants of the building long-term, whether it goes into the furniture and looking at, to Jane's point, the third-party certifications, because without those, at least to us as designers or sustainability consultants, without those sort of independent verifications, it gets hard to measure like apples to apples if you're comparing a product that, a manufacturer might say, yes, this is green, it's sustainable, it's red list free. But if we don't have that verification, it's very challenging to really know for sure what you're getting. So I sort of think about it like as an ingredient label on food, like what are you getting in your materials? And what is the environmental impact that's gone into creating those materials? And then if there are any sort of implications like off-gassing, things like that, that you want to be aware of, you want to hopefully remove as much of that as you can. But depending on the industry, there's some materials that you just have to have in certain instances, like healthcare. There's certain things that it's tough to fully remove, like everything, to Verda's point, like you try to get everything red list free, but it's not quite as easy as you might think, like everything's not available. The other challenge that we've found in the last, I'd say, year to 18 months is availability of product. Just, projects moving forward, it comes down to a standpoint of you're selecting from what can you get sort of that's the best environmentally for your project, because we have in a lot of instances, at least what we're experiencing currently, is a supply chain issues, and what can teams on the actual project sites obtain. It might be a little bit different from a manufacturing standpoint for Jane, but I think it's not for overall building. It does get really tricky to balance that, and that's exactly why, going back to the materials matrix, we build that so that we can use that as a tool to evaluate if we need to make substitutions, which seems to be happening more and more. We have some kind of tool as a team to use to evaluate a substitution or multiple substitutions. So we're not just blindly saying, oh, it's only one here, it's only one here. We're changing the drywall, or we're changing the metal stud manufacturer, we're changing the ceiling, and all that has a ripple effect, sort of where the material is coming from, what's the recycled content in the material. And then, I mean, the other piece we haven't talked a lot about, and I know Jane can speak to this too, is sort of what happens, what manufacturers will take back their product. So at the end of a useful life, do certain manufacturers have the ability to say, okay, that ceiling tile and grid has been through its useful life in an environment that it's done, it's over. Can they take it back? Can they recycle it? Can they put it back into a new product that basically then, eliminates more raw materials being used. So we try to take that into account as well, that full circle of what can happen. I mean, if we're around to see it, that'd be great, but we want to at least build in the product that can, next generation, if it's that long, can be put back into a new product, ideally.
Yeah, and I would echo that. That's actually one of the, I was going to give two examples of hand printing when we specify materials and products. And Michael, you just stole my thunder. And I also did want to echo Jane that we have so much power specifying. We can really change the needle and get things to become obsolete if we just stop specifying things that just should absolutely not be specified any longer. But number one, I would say local and minority, women owned businesses, those that have not maybe had the same advantages, competitive business advantages in the past, supporting those is a great way to hand print. So local and establishments that are women or minority owned, supporting them. And then two is advocating for circularity. I almost didn't get that out. Yeah, that too many companies stop at the point of releasing their product and they say, oh yeah, we've taken 20 pounds of plastic out of the ocean and we've done our part, here's your chair. But and then there's no end of life solution for that chair, and it might end up in the landfill. So demanding circularity, starting to ask about it. I don't think we totally understand all of the ways that can work just yet. And I think a lot of it is about a company taking ownership of their product throughout, because some of these products will last hundreds of years. Saying, I will take responsibility for this product while it's out in the world, whether it's 10 years from now or 50 years from now. And so in a sense, companies changing their business model to provide this service to take care of these products. And I think the more we ask, do you have a take back program? How can I recycle this? Is there someplace local where I can send this for it to get repaired? And there are a few organizations that are looking at legacy and continuity of products that have a long life, and to make sure that they live that long life.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's maybe a thought too. This is something we've tried to get our products back over the years. We've tried different initiatives to get our products back, and we will continue to try. One of the interesting things I do find is people ask the question about circularity during the sales process when we're about to sell them a product. And then it's, from where I see, people tend to forget about it after that. When they go to renovate, there isn't the resources and project management assigned to giving this chair back to this manufacturer and this ceiling tile back to this manufacturer and this lamp back to this other manufacturer. So there definitely needs to be a bigger conversation around circularity, and that's probably some room for hand printing of like how to figure out how that can happen and what are the different pieces. It's definitely going to take multiple different entities throughout the whole process and through different organizations of that has ownership and say in how these products are managed.
I would love to brainstorm that someday, because the design firm leaves and then there's a new designer that comes in for the next project. And how do you, not just from a manufacturer's perspective, but from the designer's perspective, how do you maintain that continuity and that responsibility for what you brought into the world?
Yeah. And especially over time. I mean, it would be one thing if it was 6 months later, you're going to deal with it, but if it's 15 years later, that can really change. A lot of things can change in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, those handoffs, those renovations, that churn of objects in an interior is actually what contributes to the majority of the carbon emissions associated with interior design activity in general, right? So every single interior may not add up to a big amount, but because in a building, an interior gets turned over many times over the life of the building, that begins to add up, and it adds up because we don't have a good way of dealing with the materials that are put in that space during each of those renovation cycles. So if we had a way to close that loop, it would be absolutely fantastic. That would be a breakthrough for an Earth Day. We're here celebrating Earth Day on Design TV with Metropolis and Humanscale. I'm so glad to have Jane Abernathy from Humanscale, Verda Alexander from Studio Jose, and Michael Pavelski from the Sherwood Partnership, talking about how we can make a positive impact in the world through design, through a concept that we call handprinting. I'm going to have a last set of thoughts from all of you here. Can you give us an example of something or talk about something you've seen recently that makes you feel optimistic about design making a positive impact, whether that's a positive impact on climate, whether it's on health, whether it's on communities? What has you feeling hopeful?
For me, I think it's seeing the initiative in the marketplace with projects that we are talking about the social piece, and we are thinking about alternative sources for energy on the specific project sites. So we're not just thinking about how to buy our way to net zero or carbon neutral, and that there is truly sort of this thought process that's happening that how can we do that based on the project that's taking place. So to me, that is hopeful that is part of the conversation on projects that are happening today. That's exciting to see.
Yeah, I would agree with Michael. I think it's more of a general sense. I'm really getting this feeling that there is a groundswell of change and awareness that is happening very, very fast. I think maybe the pandemic kind of spurred it on, but I think organizations, individuals, firms, and we're all starting to really, really open our eyes and become aware of the problem and start looking for solutions. So that makes me hopeful.
I think for me, I would say just the breadth of the conversation, it seems like that's really changing. I used to get a lot more questions from very specific designers who are already very passionate about sustainability, and that's great. I always love those conversations. But what I'm finding these days is that there are a lot more very different companies, from like the building owners to the folks that will be occupying this space, who haven't previously been asking about sustainability. And now they're asking, and they're asking better questions than they used to ask, or before we would bring it up to different companies and they would say, okay, well, maybe that's interesting, maybe it's not. But now it seems like they are very interested, like eager to hear, what we're talking about. And it does seem like it really engages a lot of people who are thinking about this now and trying to navigate it from so many different levels.
It's really a hopeful time for us. And I know I'm saying this, on Earth Day, after 50 years of activism, when we're still, fighting the good fight. But, everything has a turning point, and it does feel like we're at some kind of pivot point at the moment. The more all of us in the design industry, whether you're an interior designer, whether you're an architect, whether you're a facilities manager, whether you're on the specification side, or, you're in manufacturing or sales, the more we all start to hold ourselves to a higher bar and start to think about small opportunities wherever we can of making a positive impact through what we do, the better we will all be. We've mentioned a lot of different resources over the course of this conversation. I'm going to try and remember just a few of them now, just to recap. Of course, we're talking about this on Earth Day. We're celebrating Earth Day today on Design TV by Sandow. That's designtvbysandow.com, where you can find not just this conversation, but a whole host of other programming around sustainability, including some great conversations with Humanscale about the incredible Path Chair, a chair that is the most sustainable task chair currently in existence, and makes a verifiable net positive impact in the world. We're so excited to see it out in the world. Also, I mentioned Verda's podcast, Breaking Some Dishes. I'm sorry, Verda, it's Break Some Dishes. I'm sorry about that. Break Some Dishes.
Thank you for the plug, no worries.
Which you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. Metropolis also has a podcast. It's called Deep Green. So if you want to catch up on that, you can also find that wherever you find podcasts. Jane spoke about aligning with existing industry commitments and pledges. I would urge you, if you are an AIA member, to check out the AIA A&D Materials Pledge. It is a really important step in terms of making sure we're all aligned in the material and product specification decisions that we make that, all three of our guests today spoke so eloquently about. If you're an interior designer and you're a member of ASID or IIDA or Interior Designers of Canada, all three organizations with Metropolis have come together to create the Interior Design Pledge for Positive Impact. It really defines good interior design as design that pays attention to climate, health, and equity. And it sets some really ambitious goals on those fronts. So I would urge you to look at that. I would also urge you to look at any resources that your local chapters of your associations have put together. Verda, for example, has been part of some great efforts at IIDA. She mentioned the position statement that she's been working on. Also, Studio Place has a great resource called the Eco-Conscious Playbook. There's so many resources for people out there called the Eco-Conscious Playbook. I suggest you check it out. It really takes a big picture view of how we can look at sustainable interior design. If you're interested specifically in the carbon footprint of interior design, Metropolis has a resource called the Climate Toolkit for Interior Design, which looks at strategies to decarbonize your work as interior designers. Lots of great resources for anybody who's interested in making a positive impact in the world. So I urge you all today on Earth Day, not to just think about reducing your footprint, but to start thinking about how you can leave a handprint on this world. Thank you all so much, Jane, Ferda, and Michael, for joining us today. And thanks everyone who's listening. I do hope I can say Happy Earth Day, because I do hope that we will see a brighter future from here on. Thank you all so much.
I'm Jason Harmsey, VP of Product Management at Humanscale. I have an awesome guest today, Todd Brecher, designer of our new path chair. Todd, welcome to Piscataway, our manufacturing facility in New Jersey.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Today, it's very exciting, Todd. We're talking about our new path chair that you designed with us, and a great collaboration. If we could get onto the path backstory on how it came about and how long it's taken to get us to this point.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, Humanscale has this amazing legacy of ergonomic seating that's really different from anyone else in our industry.
Thank you.
And as you know, well over 20 years. And this chair path is interesting because it really leaned on that legacy, and it really looked to take the evolution that's been well in place from Niels Different and from Humanscale and really help try to usher it into a new generation in a way. As you're well aware, Humanscale chair is so fantastic is the idea that there's no need for user adjustments, right?
Correct.
There's no springs, there's no levers, locks, all these sort of things that you typically find underneath a task chair. And instead, the chair just works by your body weight, just works seamlessly. And I think that's something that is very unusual to achieve and very difficult to achieve. And Humanscale's been doing this for well over 20 years.
When you started designing the path, what did you lean towards to come up with just the design and the real look of the product?
Looking at that legacy of Humanscale and understanding the trajectory of our space as well, it's evolved over a long period of time. And so we knew that folks didn't really want this sort of traditional type task chair anymore. But the one thing that hasn't changed is there really is still this need for ergonomic support. You still need to sit properly if you're going to sit at any kind of computer or do any kind of long duration work. Path really was born from this idea of combining contemporary culture with superior ergonomics.
One of the innovations that really struck me was the design of the knit. If you could just break that down a little simple for everyone. I know it's a lot to take in, but just the idea where we got the FormSense Echo Knit from.
You typically can find a mesh type chair, right? Mesh chairs I think are very nice, they're very comfortable, they're very supportive. Downside with a mesh chair is, in my opinion, is they're very technical looking, right? They're gray. A textile chair is really nice. It feels great in the hand, it can come in millions of colors. What we've developed together is this idea of what we call FormSense Eco Knit. The FormSense Eco Knit looks like a textile, feels like a textile, but it's knitted, and so therefore it behaves like a mesh. It gives you the tensile support in your lumbar just like a mesh, but it has these now beautiful colors in the hand of a textile. So for us, you're bringing that warmth, that sort of human quality back to seating.
Talk about how we got the tension right for the product, for that perfect sit.
That's one thing that we're really proud of. Through a lot of testing, we were able to get this FormSense knit, for example, to perform in such a way that it gives you the perfect balance of technical ergonomic support, but just trying to be quiet about it. I'm curious, and I'm sure others would like to know, can you tell us more about the supply chain and how did that supply chain, challenges there and relative to sustainability?
Sure, Todd. So we sent our teams out to various parts of the world to try to find out where we could get this material. As you know, this material is not just available on your doorstep. So on the fishnet side, we've been working with a number of other companies. We found a new source that is giving us over 7 pounds of recycled fishnet in every single one of our products.
Okay.
A lot of post-consumer and post-consumer bottles. There's a whole process that needs to take place. So it's taking the discarded from the ocean, cleaning it, getting into pellets and getting into our product. So all of this came together and this is the beautiful product we have today. So 22 pounds of recycled material is currently in this product, which makes up 50% of the path chair.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so that's where we were, but it's a process we've got to keep going, and who knows what the future will hold,
Right.
bring in more products. So
It's one thing when we say it's the most sustainable task chair.
sure.
How do you qualify that? Like, where does this information come from?
So there's a learn product challenge. We actually send into a third party that gets evaluated, we get certified, and that's the information we use to get out to the public. So it's a very rigorous process, but we've met all the requirements that we have needed to be.
So Jason, for folks that might not know, to achieve a Living Product Challenge certification, you have to meet 3 key criteria: climate, water, and energy.
That's correct.
Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, so the Path Chair plus another 25 other products meets this criteria. And once again, we're a leader in the industry. We are giving more than what we ever received, which makes the product net positive.
So essentially, the more this chair is sold in our world, the cleaner our environment
The
actually
more you're
gets.
getting back from almost a carbon footprint perspective as well.
Beautiful. The design almost becomes the easy part in some ways, and it's the sourcing and the supply chain behind it is such a challenge.
Exactly, so putting the package together
Yes.
to make sure it meets those criteria.
And I think if you want to learn more about it, folks should really click into Humanscale and understand all the effort that goes into it.
Appreciate that.
It's a
Appreciate that,
reinvention
Todd,
of a supply chain, materials. I mean, it's a tremendous effort.
Yeah, there's a whole village behind us getting us to this point
That's right.
as we launch this product. So, Todd, I just want to thank you for coming out today, coming to Perspetaway, giving us the breakdown of the great design story, as well as the sustainability side of it. And I wish you all the success in the future.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Cheers. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Task chairs over the years have become increasingly complex. We wanted to find a way to make the seating simplified, beautiful, functional, and in this case, highly sustainable.
Path incorporates all of the innovations that we've developed over the last 25 years, plus some additional ones. It has a design aesthetic that fits perfectly to a whole wide range of applications. And of course, it takes sustainability to a whole new level. Humanscale has always believed in making things simple to use, and so we've done things like eliminating the complex mechanism that's under virtually every chair and replaced it with one thing: the weight of whoever happens to be sitting on the chair at any given moment, plus the laws of physics.
As your body weight pushes down on the chair, you engage the mechanism, and when you recline, that mechanism lifts just gently up, so your body becomes the actual counterbalance, in a way, of the chair itself. No matter your size or your body weight, the moment you sit in the chair is instantly tuned for your body. As you move spontaneously, as you reach, as you move your body as you normally want to, this chair supports and moves perfectly in sync with you. We didn't want you to see or notice really any mechanical aspects of this chair. It's an engineering feat to make something look and feel so familiar and comfortable while not looking complex.
Everything Humanscale makes, it's completely ours, so we're starting from the ground up on every component. We've spent a long time sourcing various materials and ensuring that there's nothing harmful within the chair. We're constantly testing it for comfort, durability, and longevity.
We really wanted Path to be different. We designed this so that it's actually something that's covetable and feels really warm and natural in most interior settings. The textures, the tactility, the depth of color was really important to us. The knits themselves are actually a blend of the color library that we created. The knit is truly driven by performance and sustainability. It's knit to shape, so there's really no waste. The yarns themselves are made out of recycled plastic bottles. The performance of the knit is embedded in the material. The outer bands of the lumbar zone are actually knit with greater tension inside, and so it stretches the center taut, which is where you need the most support for your back. As you sit into it, it intuitively embraces your body. We're not giving anything up by making a chair look more comfortable and look more beautiful. All of the technology and innovation that Humanscale has been pioneering for decades is wrapped into this really beautiful package.
Welcome to Design TV by Sandow, where we're marking Earth Day with Humanscale, a leading designer and manufacturer of ergonomic products. Recently, Humanscale launched the Path Chair, which is the world's most sustainable task chair because it makes a measurable positive impact on both people and planet, as certified by the International Living Future Institute. I'm lucky enough to be sitting in a Path Chair today, and I can personally attest to how fantastic the sitting experience is. Here's the wonderful thing about the Path Chair is that it's good and healthy, not just for the folks who sit in it, but also for all the folks who help make it. In fact, Humanscale has been making a huge effort across all of its products with its suppliers and manufacturing facilities to ensure that its products have a positive impact throughout their life cycle, from manufacturing to end of life. Here with me today to discuss that enormous effort is Bob King, founder and CEO of Humanscale. Bob, such a pleasure to have you with me today.
Avi, thanks. It's wonderful to be with you again virtually, and thanks for the very kind words.
Of course. I mean, this has been such an enormous effort on Humanscale's part. The vast majority of our products today come with some kind of transparency declaration. They tell your customers exactly what your products are made of and how they're made. Why is that kind of transparency important to you, Bob?
Transparency is incredibly important because when people are trying to make a thoughtful, considered decision about the products to bring into their home or into their office, without transparency, they don't have the ability to do that. And if they don't have the ability to do that, the manufacturers are not motivated to do the right thing. Are not motivated to use materials that are healthy for folks working upstream, that's healthy for the planet and so on.
That last bit that you spoke about, the upstream, very often we're so concerned about the effect of interior design and of interior products on the health of the people who use them. Obviously, I'm sitting here in my home office and I don't want any chemicals in here that are going to adversely affect my health. And that's fine. But then those same chemicals are also impactful for the people who handle them during the manufacturing process. So, much as a chemical might have an effect on the people who sit in your products or use your products, they do have an impact on the people who are handling them throughout the manufacturing process as well. And it's that understanding that I think that's really fantastic about Humanscale's effort around transparency. Can you tell us a little bit about the broader impact, the impact across your supply chains around the world?
As you said, everyone's thinking, oh, I want to make sure I have a healthy workplace or a healthy home and I don't have toxic chemicals here. But of course, upstream and then also downstream, there can be very, very indeed tragic impacts of using chemicals that are toxic. A classic example, of course, is Chrome-6. So Chrome-6 is actually not a problem when you're using it. It's a problem during the manufacturing process. If you're if you're tanning leather, or if you're coating metal to make it shiny with Chrome 6, at that point, it's a terrible carcinogen. And very often, this type of work is done in poor countries, in factories that they're pretty much unregulated. And so what you see is, water being polluted and air being polluted in poor places, and having tragic results on the people and also the wildlife that lives in that area. So by making the right decision about using an alternative to Chrome 6, and there's healthy materials that can be used instead of Chrome 6, like Chrome 3, you can have a really positive impact on the planet and on the people who live in those places.
I want to talk a little bit about the decisions that you made in that regard with the Path Chair in particular. But before we do that, you brought up Chrome 6 and Chrome 3, and I happen to know that one of the barriers in using Chrome 3, which is better for the health and well-being of the communities involved in the manufacturing of the product, is that it requires a different kind of process. It comes at a slightly higher cost. And very often, because we're so concerned with the end users, folks are like, why should we go for a more expensive alternative? So, can you talk a little bit about the work that you did with your vendors, with the people who work with Humanscale to supply, parts or materials to you, to kind of motivate them to make that shift to Chrome 3?
Sure, and that's what's really important. We're a relatively small company. We're maybe 5% of the entire office furniture industry, and so whatever we do only impacts 5%. Ultimately, what we want to do is get the rest of the industry to follow us and use healthy materials, have less of an impact on climate change and so on. And so many years ago, when we were working to get rid of all of the red listed chemicals from our products, we went to suppliers, and for Chrome 6 in particular, we went to our suppliers who were coating our material in our metal in Chrome 6 to make it shiny, and said we want Chrome 3, and they of course said, well, we can't coat in Chrome 3. We don't have that type of equipment, and we said, well, you have to, because we're going to move it to someone else if you don't, and we can help you finance the machinery or the equipment that you need if necessary, but we have to have it. And you have long, hard discussions with them, and then you make financial commitments to them, and you get them to agree to bring the equipment in, to buy the equipment, and now they're capable of coating stuff with shiny metal that's Chrome 3. It's not red listed chemical anymore. So now all their other customers can just say, hey, can you switch me to Chrome 3? All of my customers have been asking for Chrome 3, and it's easy. And so by doing that, you make it easier for everyone else to follow, which is great. And then you can really have a positive impact. And that's just one example, but you do that across the board, and you can really have a positive impact on the planet.
That's fantastic, right? I mean, that's the power of sometimes being the first person to really tackle a problem like that, do the hard work that's necessary to get everyone on board.
Yeah, it's important to be the pioneer and to be the leader, because otherwise it's not going to happen. So someone has to do it, and I'd like to think that there are companies in every major industry that are leading. The positive thing about leading is you get the credit for leading too. So you get credit, and your brand is considered a very sustainable brand because you're leading. So we get benefit. We're not just sacrificing ourselves. We get a benefit from it as well in terms of brand recognition and that sort of thing.
That's really the ideal situation, that doing the right thing by communities and by people is also, doing the right thing for business. And, that's the kind of win-win that we always like to see. Bob, the Path Chair, which again, I'm sitting in today, thank you so much, it's fantastic, is kind of builds on all that work that you've been doing over the last few years on sustainability, on materials transparency, Every material in this chair is so carefully selected and engineered. Can you talk a little bit about the Path chair in terms of its composition and manufacturing?
Sure, and we've been learning more and more about using healthy materials as we've gone through this journey. It's been a very interesting journey. You start thinking that recycling material is the answer to everything, and then you realize that it's not even scratching the surface, of course. So just at a high level, the Path chair does use recycled material. Over 50% of that chair, over 50% of it is recycled material. Almost 9 pounds, just under 9 pounds of the plastic is made from reclaimed fishing nets. So fishing nets that would be otherwise floating in the ocean, which is the worst kind of ocean plastic. It destroys marine life for decades. By doing deals with the fishermen and having them give an intermediate company the nets to process so we can turn it into chairs, that means that net is not floating around the ocean. So it has a direct impact on our oceans, which is really cool. And then all the other materials that we use in there are mostly either recycled or sustainable. There's certainly nothing that's anywhere close to being red listed. If there's shiny metal on it, it's either polished aluminum, or in a couple of cases in the casters, we need to use chrome just where there's a rotation for the strength, and we use chrome 3 for that small amount of metal.
What's fantastic about your journey with ocean plastics, which of course, Path is not the only chair that you've used that plastic on. There's been the Smart Ocean chair and a couple of other chairs in your line that now use plastic that was ultimately destined for the oceans. The fantastic thing about it is that it's also a way of supporting those communities that, otherwise these fishing nets would be a waste product for them. And now they have an additional source of revenue through actually collecting and giving up these fishing nets. So it's kind of another type of supply chain benefit that you're able to pass on to communities.
Right, and it becomes self-sufficient in that these folks are paid to take their fishing nets on their boat, bring it, throw it in a pile in the parking lot until the truck comes and picks it up. And it pays for the folks who drive the truck who come to pick it up, right? And what pays for it are customers who buy it and value the fact that they're having a positive impact on the ocean. And they almost always explain to their employees how the new chairs they're getting are made from reclaimed fishing nets, and that if they weren't sitting on those chairs, the nets would be floating around the ocean. Isn't that cool? And it makes everyone who works for that organization feel good about the organization. So it creates value there, and it creates value in a circular way, and it's sustainable. So it has to be sustainable, and you have to create value all the way along that circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much of what we think about in sustainability, whether we're talking about, from a material standpoint or we're talking about a human impact standpoint, is really about creating value, and that's what you do so successfully through the supply chains of many of your products. And what I guess I'm interested in is when you think about your customers, the interior designers you work with, the companies that you work with who ultimately use your product in their spaces, many of them are beginning to engage in a deeper way with ideas of environmental and social impact. How do you convey to them, how are you talking to them about why their decisions in specifying products in particular can make a big difference to their goals? Because many of the large corporations have declared goals that are in some way they want to do good for the environment or for society. How can selecting products responsibly contribute towards that?
Well, of course, by selecting products that are climate neutral, or in our case, climate positive. There actually aren't any climate neutral products in the industry. We have the only climate positive products in the industry. hopefully others will follow shortly. But by doing that, of course, that improves their metrics. They're reporting on carbon, right? Carbon emissions. So that improves their numbers significantly by making thoughtful decisions. Of course, not all of them are putting metrics together. So we try to talk to folks about the importance of putting numbers together and reporting those numbers, and more companies are, which is terrific. And that means they're making thoughtful decisions when they're bringing products in. If you don't keep track of it and you don't have metrics on it, there's ultimately no transparency. So it doesn't matter. You need to have transparency all the way through. And the most important thing we can do is educate people about the fact that you can get products that are red list chemical free, that are not made of vinyl, that don't have formaldehyde in them, and so on.
What's incredible about your particular efforts around transparency, which I think are noteworthy not just because of the way that you connect sort of material substitutions or process changes with the impact that they have on people and communities, is that linkage between the E and the S in ESG, right? I think a lot of companies are looking at meeting some kind of ESG goals or targets today, and very often those two tracks tend to be quite separate from each other. And here, what I think you're showing is that they are in fact linked, that environmental impact and social impact cannot really be separated from each other. And that's the amazing thing about the Path Chair in particular is, as you said, it's climate positive, but at the same time, it is also responsibly made, and it has these kind of multiplying impacts across its supply chain, not just in its manufacturing, but also potentially in its end of life.
If you're careful about selecting the ingredients that go into your products and make sure there's no red listed chemicals, it protects people, not only wildlife, but people, upstream and downstream in the supply chain. It can have a huge impact. And you're right. It's interesting how those two, I think you said the S and the G are linked in that way. So no, it has an enormous impact, which is something people don't think a lot about. And downstream too. An example is electric wire. There's a huge industry of salvaging copper from electric wire. And of course, when things are thrown away, electric wire is thrown away, you have to strip away the vinyl because all electric wire is coated with vinyl. And of course, what happens is this material gets shipped to a poor country where there's little regulation. And the easiest way to get rid of the vinyl coating is to burn it. So it's burned. And polyvinyl chloride goes into the air, which is a terrible carcinogen and red listed chemical, and it's in the air, and people in these communities are breathing it. So imagine that you're being careful about doing the right thing by folks who work in your company, but all of your wires are vinyl and they're being burned in a poor country and people are breathing it. So it can have you have to really understand what's going on in order to really have an impact on people.
Clearly, within the ambit of what Humanscale makes, you've set a fantastic benchmark for the industry. It's really amazing to be able to talk about these kinds of details, the coating on wires, the chrome on casters, right? And just the impact that those small details can have on the earth, ecosystems, wildlife, flora, fauna, and people included on Earth Day. This has been fantastic to talk to you about it. On a last note, what do you think, how can designers help our industry see this kind of change at scale? What can designers do with the other vendors and manufacturers and collaborators and clients and others that they work with to kind of start to push in the right direction? What kinds of questions should they be asking?
Well, the best thing that all of us can do, and you've done a wonderful job at this, we've tried to do a good job at this, is educate people about the importance of using healthy materials And of course, using healthy materials can't happen without transparency. So you certainly have taught a lot of people about the importance of transparency. We try to do that. And designers, ultimately, designers specify product. It's really important that designers ask manufacturers for transparency. And in fact, I shouldn't say ask, that's the wrong word. Demand transparency from manufacturers. And if they demand it, they'll get transparency because they have all the power, which is wonderful. And there's some organizations now that in many product categories, not all because it's not possible to do it all, but in many product categories have said we will only buy products that come with an ingredients label, a declare label or an HPD label. And the more we can insist on that sort of transparency, the better the impact on humans and the planet. And the cool thing about it is you don't have to go and say, hey, geez, I'd like to have chairs without Chrome 6, or I'd like to have leather that doesn't use Chrome 6. All you have to do is ask for the transparency label, because no one in their right mind is going to give you a transparency label that has red all over it, right? That's the reason companies don't get transparency labels, because they haven't made the commitment to get rid of the red list of chemicals. So by demanding transparency, we automatically make companies do the right thing in terms of materials.
Bob, it's been such a pleasure talking to you about the importance of transparency. And I think for designers, it's really important for designers to understand that, at the point of specification, while you're considering products, that is the perfect pressure point at which to demand transparency. Once products have been selected, it's too late, right? So when you have leverage, ask for transparency information, ask for declarations, ask for certifications. Each product category, there are different chemicals and different factors to be sensitive to. But it's really important that we push for transparency. And Bob, you've done such a fantastic job laying out why that's so important, and really the multiplying effects that good practices can have, the kind of pressure that transparency puts on manufacturers, on the industry as a whole, can have these really wide consequences for the planet and for communities and for wildlife, for all life on this planet. Thank you so much, Bob, for spending the time with me today on Earth Day. It's been fantastic talking to you about this.
Avi, always great talking to you. Thanks for spending the time with me.
And thanks everyone for joining us today on Earth Day. If you want to know more about Humanscale's efforts around transparency, you can find that at humanscale.com, on metropolismag.com, and also on designtv.com, where we're sharing all this amazing content all day today on Earth Day. I do hope this inspires you to make a greater effort in your own work to push for transparency, to push for a great understanding of the impact that design can have on people and planet, and to ensuring a healthy and sustainable future for us all. Thank you so much, Bob. And thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you, everyone.
There are more chairs in this world than there are people. So why make another? Because this chair gives back more than it takes, making it better for the planet and better for you. This chair cleans up our environment by diverting waste from landfills and oceans, adapts to every body by replacing complex knobs with a new self-adjusting technology for the perfect support, and complements your own unique style. The decisions we make add up, at home and at the office, to less waste, and eventually, a cleaner planet. That sounds like a new path forward to us. Introducing the world's most sustainable task chair, Path by Humanscale.